All these thoughts running through my head. All these thoughts are turning red. Just getting bigger. Bang, bang, bang. Pull my devil trigger. And apparently pull it and kill Dragon's Dogma 2. Unbelievable. Unbelievable that Dragon's Dogma 2 has been such an epic L for Capcom. Because it feels like for the past decade, people have been like trying to gaslight you into thinking this is like one of the best open uh, best action RPGs ever made, right? That it was like way better than Skyrim, way better than Dark Souls, way better than Zelda, even, right? Like people were saying that, like, oh, Itano, Itano, he's one of the great geniuses of our time. Oh, if Capcom would just let him release another game, it's gonna be a masterpiece with today's technology and some more experience. Like he's going to make a masterpiece. It's the exact same game. That's the reality with Dragon's Dogma 2 right now, is that you have no additional vocations, you don't have any new interesting mechanics. It's the same thing. And the game was finicky, obtuse, and just like what's the word for it? Stiff. Like to begin with, like they made no improvements, they made no changes, an entire decade wasted, right? Like just compare how much Zelda evolved, like in between Skyward Sword and Tears of the Kingdom, right? Like it's crazy how they went to like having like the crazy item progressions in Skyward Sword, like how you can use like items in all these different situations, right? How they went to like the open world in Breath of the Wild, and then they have how they introduced like the vehicle building and like the open air, like the Sky Islands in Tears of the Kingdom, right? A constant evolution of new ideas through the far superior video game franchise that is The Legend of Zelda. What did Dragon's Dogma 2 on Valve Steam platform do for anyone, right? Like all anybody can do is just like sit with their thumb up their ass and like trying to convince you that like, oh, the game is good actually. All these problems like are just coming from people who don't know how to play it properly. Like if you really put a lot of time into Dragon's Dogma, it is one of the best experiences you'll ever have. Well, then why have all of these people not had fun with it? Right? Like, how many people were really looking forward to Dragon's Dogma 2? Not a whole lot. The game had a very dedicated group of fanboys, people who genuinely believe that like Itsuno is some great creator. I wholeheartedly believe that like if Hideki Kamiya had been allowed to finish Scalebound, like Scalebound would have easily modded like both Dragon's Dogmas without even trying. Like the thing about Itsuno is that he is a complete fraud, right? He is the modern day Keiji Inafune, right? Because we all know what happened with Keiji Inafune, right? Where like you had like the original Mega Man team, like you had like Kitamura, you had like those guys, and then you had like the Code Monkey like artist like Inafune, right? Who was just like whiling in the way in the corner, right? As the years went by, like Inafune was the only one who stayed on the team, and eventually he had seniority, and he was responsible for like the direction Mega Man took, like in the later half of the 90s and the early 2000s, all right? Focusing more on Zero and stuff like that. And eventually, like, the entire thing, like, imploded, right? At the time, when, like, when he pulled that stunt where, like, where he quit Capcom and he tried to tell people that, like, oh, I wanted to make all these great Mega Man games for you guys, but Capcom wouldn't let me. People believed that. People thought he was being completely serious. So they like kickstarted Mighty Number 9, and that became one of the biggest indie scams of all time. The man will forever be branded with the nickname Con Man, right? Nobody likes Inafune, right? Itsuno is of the same ilk, right? We're seeing the exact same pattern here, where people like are looking at these epic fails from Itsuno, like Devil May Cry 2, Devil May Cry 4, Devil May Cry 5, and now Dragon's Dogma 2. Actually, the original Dragon's Dogma as well. Like the Dragon's Dogma games, like they're looking at these epic fails from Itsuno. Right, and they're trying to tell you that, like, oh, Itsuno's a great creator. He's just being held back by the suits at Capcom. What are the suits doing exactly? Like he's still producing games. Like you're telling me he can't get a team together, he can't get a budget. Like that's entirely on him. right? Like Mikami never had problems. Like Mikami handled Clover. Like they produced bomb after bomb for like 3 years, and then they went on to form Platinum. Like if Itsuno is so great, why doesn't he just leave and form his own studio? Right? The reality is he's not great. He's not a talented creator. Never has been. Like the guy made Devil May Cry 2. Okay, like one of the worst video games of all time, and you're gonna sit here and tell me that like, oh, Dragon's Dogma 2 would have been great if Capcom like, no, Monster Hunter is doing perfectly fine when it's on Nintendo hardware, right? Like you can't look at like Dragon's Dogma and try to tell me that like, oh, the same company that produces Monster Hunter didn't give enough time and attention to Dragon's Dogma. Like a superficially similar like action RPG, right? Like, no, you can't do that. Like, the reality is, Dragon's Dogma was never that successful. It was never that popular. It was never that good. And yet, you have a lot of people who were determined to push this narrative that this was one of the greatest games of all time, to try to cement, like, Itsuno as, like, the big name at Capcom, right? I do think this is, like, a big reason why Devil May Cry 5 like had such a was received so well, even though it was complete trash. It's like, oh, Itsuno made the game he wanted to make. Like real in reality, no. Like if Itsuno had his way, Dante and Virgil would have been out of the picture, and it would have all been about like Nero and V. His original characters, right? Like and Nero would have been like way stronger than Dante. Like, oh man, he has a way bigger penis. He actually has sex. Like you would have gotten like all this like crazy fan wake bullshit. Okay, but no, they have to have Dante and Virgil because that's all the fanboys care about. That's the only part of like the DMC lore that like anybody recognizes or like cares for, right? Even though Virgil has only been in like what DMC3, so it's like okay, like the I am very very happy to see like the results of like Itsuno's like cultish behavior, right? I do feel like Dragon's Dogma 2 has by and large been received very poorly among the community, right? The microtransaction thing kicked off like the entire debacle, but it does feel like the game in general has not been well received at all, right? I'm seeing like men like Jim Sterling give this give this game like a 3 out of 10, and that's probably too high to be completely honest with you because I would never play this shit. Like I never finished the original Dragon's Dogma because it was also very bad. So like for me personally, it's like why was this game made? Who was it made for? Like, who would want to play it? Like, I do think we're kind of at that point where, like, a lot of these, like, hardcore fanboys of these, like, early 2000s creators, right? People like Itsuno, people like Kojima. Like, I do think we are going to see these people, like, fade away in the next 10 years, right? Like, I do think we're kind of at, like, the beginning of the end of a lot of these, like, classic video game franchises. And it is kind of sad, honestly, but, like, when you look at like stuff like Dragon's Dogma and like BioShock and Mass Effect going the way of the dodo, like are you gonna miss these games at all? Like really? Like were these games really special or spectacular to begin with? Like no, like they're not. They're not gonna be played or enjoyed by future generations. Like they're just gonna be like footnotes, right? Like oh yeah, Dragon's Dogma competed with Zelda once before getting wrecked. Dark Souls competed with Zelda once before getting wrecked. Like it's yeah, they're just going to be like footnotes in the history. Like, they're going to be like, how I like make fun of Killer Instinct or like a Dark Cloud and stuff like that, right? Like, it's going to be like that. Like, oh man, they actually tried to compete with Zelda for this. How hilarious, right? Like there are just there are things to talk about when it comes to Dragon's Dogma and what a disappointment it was. But I really wonder if like the community is going to accept them, right? Because it does kind of feel like the vast majority of the community, like the fan base, they are running damage control. I've seen a lot of people like misrepresent the microtransaction thing, like, oh, it's not a big deal they did this, like you don't have to do it, blah blah blah. Like I've seen people downplay like the repetitiveness of the game, the shallowness of the combat, the lack of vocations, right? The lack of new features, right? Again, the game just isn't all that good in general. But we are seeing a lot of people in denial about it, right? Just like they were for Devil May Cry 5. So, I am optimistic that, like, with the way things currently look, that Dragon's Dogma 2 is going to be seen as a disappointment. But I also expect that there will be a lot of hardcore fanboys who will not stop pushing until this game is just completely dead in the water. Until Capcom pulls a Mega Man Legends 3 and just comes out and says it's just not going to happen, right? I very much look forward to that day, but until then, I will see you all next time. Play Nintendo.